You know what made me realize this massive fasting mistake that's been right in front of me for 10 years was this. I posted this kind of funny video. It's cheeky, me running in front of a red light. And I said, I'm just here simulating that I'm chasing down food on an empty stomach in the wee morning hours in the glow of the sunrise and barefoot to simulate my ancestors before I get in my truck, drive to the local coffee shop and buy a latte like a modern man. The joke was like, hey, we're doing all these things to simulate our ancestors, but then we have these modern conveniences. So let me go like simulate my ancestors and then go hop in my truck and get a latte, right? Kind of funny, but also reality. And it made me realize with fasting, and I was talking with Dr. Sean O'Mara, who's definitely the world's like leading expert on visceral fat. And it occurred to me that I've been making this big mistake. And it's not this mistake that's like, hey, it discredits everything you've ever been doing with fasting and you have to change everything. It's actually a really liberating mistake to kind of like understand and to change things from. In essence, our ancestors didn't have high amounts of visceral fat. As a matter of fact, Dr. Sean O'Mara talked about a study from 1985 where an anthropologist looked at MRIs of like ancestors that we found from hundreds of thousands of years ago. And they were able to do the best they could and ultimately say like, hey, wait a minute, like we don't have high amounts of like metabolic dysfunction from what we can see. But also he mentioned something that was really fascinating, and that was wild animals. He's like, wild animals don't have visceral fat. They don't have metabolic dysfunction. But when they're in captivity, we start to see it. Or if they're close to urban areas, they start to see it. So what he started suggesting is, hey, this whole fasting thing, Thomas, that you do you're really onto something with that, because that's kind of what we probably would have done. But then it occurred to me that I fast in very structured time periods. Like I'll go 24 hours, I'll go, 36 hours. I set these time periods, or I'll do like, a couple times per week at this hours. And I understand that's how we have to gamify it. But it occurred to me then that the mistake that I've been making was not having randomness to my fasts. And when I say randomness, I mean randomness to the lengths too. Some days I should be going 24 hours. Then randomly, I may want to go 48. And then another time I may want to just go 12. And then another day I may want to actually just eat all day. And it's about the efficiency and the metabolic adaptation that's occurring. And I knew this deep down. Obviously, it's why I would fast. I knew it was a metabolic adaptation that would trigger this benefit from fasting. But what I didn't always think about was how you would just adjust, and it's time to kind of change it all the time. Like, what would we actually do if we were living 1,000 years ago, or if we were living tens of thousands of years ago? Like, whatever the case may be, it might be 3 days before we have any food. It might be a week before we have any food, but then we might have a surplus, right? Then we would get a kill and we'd have food for a week. So for 5 days, we gorge ourselves and we eat a ton. And the other thing is that we would probably have high intensity bursts of activity surrounding that, right? So it's always this like pedal to the metal, go, 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 and then rest, 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 right? So I've been looking at fasting so logically. I was like, how do we gamify this so that it's doable for the people in Silicon Valley that need to intermittent fast every day, right? Or they try to gamify it in that way. But in reality, randomness would make it so much more effective because it allows us to emulate what wild animals do or what our ancestors would have done. Now, I still think simple things added in, like electrolytes, make sense, right? Like I link down to LMNT down below because I use them all the time when I'm fasting. They're still my fasting go-to. I think that makes sense because some modern conveniences just make sense, right? Some coffee, things like that. I'm not talking about getting rid of that stuff, okay? I'm talking about the effects of like food itself, massive caloric influx. So what does this look like from a randomness side of things? I mean, I would still say start your day with like LMNT electrolytes or any kind of electrolyte that you really prefer. I linked out to LMNT down below if you want to try them. That's a free sample variety pack. They've been a supporter of this channel for as long as they've been around, which is over 7 years. So a free sample variety pack of their leading flavors with any purchase. Drink lmnt.com/Thomas. Again, they've always been my go-to for fasting and have allowed fasting to remain very successful for me because I'm getting my minerals in when my insulin levels are low, so I'm not just losing all my fluids. But that leads me to another point. Okay, so I do recommend you check them out. But the other side of this whole fasting thing is I actually think that we may want to go periods of time where we take in some electrolytes and minerals and then go a period of time with minimal hydration. Not saying you purposely dehydrate yourself, but I'm saying, didn't our ancestors probably go maybe, hours at least or a day without water, right? I know we live in an unnatural time now, like where we're probably going to work out harder, we're going to sweat more in a more deliberate fashion, and we want to replenish. I get that. But there's also going to be times when it might make sense to just kindly deprive yourself of a little bit of fluid, right? It would just make sense that our body would learn how to properly retain and learn how to properly expel. I've personally noticed it myself. Like if I drink a lot of water and I don't remineralize, don't add electrolytes or get enough salt in, then the moment I stop drinking water, I get really dehydrated because my body is so enabled and used to having fluids coming in. Now, I don't want to get down any kind of dangerous rabbit hole with this, but I've done some videos on dry fasting before, which there's some legit stuff going on there with dry fasting. And I think that we probably should look at it more because it might have some effects. But again, safety first with that thing. That can be pretty extreme. So what would this look like? So I'd start my day, I'd have some electrolytes, and then maybe I'd eat breakfast. And then maybe I'd just go randomly 12 or 13 or 14 hours throughout the day and then just eat dinner. And then maybe I'd just fast for 24 hours after that point. And then maybe I'd maybe I'd just eat for a day or two straight where I eat 3 or 4 times per day, right? Point is that our ancestors, I can almost guarantee you, did not have a deliberate pattern of eating. When you would hunt something and you would actually get it, that's not food for one night. That could be food for a week. But it makes me think that I'm sure there were times when they got a lot of food, they ate like they were never going to get food again, and then what do you know? 2 days later, they get more food. So you've got these periods where you're going to have caloric surplus and then severe deficit. And this leads to that adaptation. So what is the big mistake that I've been making? Is probably over gamifying it. Do short fasts, do long fasts, go periods of time without fasting, make it utterly random, and allow your hydration to some degree to be a little bit random, and allow your activity to be, to a certain degree, a little bit random with its intensity. We're all here with our perfectly periodized programs. I'm going to train chest today and do this, and having a plan is great, but aren't we like prefrontal lobing this too much? For example, today, it was on my agenda to just deadlift and do posterior chain work. I was going to do deadlift, some pull-ups, I was going to work the posterior chain and some hinge movements. But my body felt good. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to sprint today. I did that and then I sprinted afterwards. And I did it just until I scratched that itch just enough, right? The other thing that I'm going to end with on this is that I don't think that we touch intensity enough. And Dr. Sean O'Mara and I talked about this. You have to tap into that intensity reserve. You have to, and you have to do it in a fasted state. And a lot of times like, we would kind of dance around intensity in a fasted state, but that is probably just physiologically correct for us to be in that fasted, hungry state, going for the hunt to get something so that we could eat. And sometimes it's a fight to the absolute, complete red line 100%. So anyway, food for thought. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel. We'll see you tomorrow.